Good job, guys. Well done. You've made loads of money. Well done. But at what cost? That is what I want to talk about on this video. I'm Tim, and this is Egg Chasers, and let's talk about this place. Which, don't call it Twickenham. Well, you can call it Twickenham for about another 3 weeks. It's the Allianz Stadium from next month, all right? Don't you forget it. Not Twickenham anymore. The home of rugby, a mecca of sport. Not just the home of rugby in England, the home of rugby in the world. The country that established the sport, that grew the sport, spread it around the world. This is the spiritual home of our sport, and it's called the Allianz Stadium. Do you know what? That's actually kind of perfect. That the home of rugby has sold its name for kind of a load of corporate cash. Probably that is as symbolic as anything in rugby right now. Although, do you know what? Every now and again I sort of think, do you know what? Maybe rugby's onto something now. Maybe it's turned a corner, because it was only last week we were talking about that Nations Championship finals weekend in Qatar for £800 million being turned down. And then I thought, wow, that took some guts to say no to all that cash. Maybe there's hope after all, and then this happens. Do you know what? I'm open-minded, actually. Before I go any further, I'm open-minded to the fact that I might be being a little bit precious. I might be being a bit too traditional, and I might be just being resistant to change. And if you think that's the case, I'm honestly open-minded to that, and please tell me what you think in the comments down below. I'd love it if I haven't already, if I would earn your subscription. But what came to mind when I saw the news a little bit earlier was this quote from Oscar Wilde. People know the price of everything and the value of nothing. I think the quote is actually a cynic knows the price of everything and the value of nothing, but the point stands. There are some things which you can put a pound or dollar value on. There are some things that you can't. There are some intangibles where the value is much, much harder to assess, but is, as a result, in some respects, priceless. And I think this might be one of those occasions when it comes to Twickenham Stadium, which was built in 1907. Affectionately called the Cabbage Patch because it was built on land where vegetables were grown in West London, and it became the home of rugby for the world. It's the largest rugby stadium on earth, and it is, the word I've already used, it's a mecca. And the way that people revere it when they come from abroad to Twickenham, it's always a special moment for players when they come and play at this ground. And I'm sure that will still be the case. It's just how much of that intangible stardust does it lose when you call it the Allianz Stadium? Again, your thoughts. I'd love to know. I'll tell you what, I'm not totally resistant to change. I know things do change in rugby. The laws change. We went from amateur to professional. The game is constantly evolving, and I'm not against that. But here's an example of how even at Twickenham Stadium, things have changed, but there's a line that you don't cross. These are the memorial gates. So these were built in honour of George Rowland Hill. Sir George Rowland Hill, because he was the first person ever knighted for services to rugby. And when he died in 1928, I think it was, they built these gates in his honour. He was a custodian of the sport, and he helped rugby. I think 50 years he was an administrator, and he helped rugby get through that period where there was the big split and the professional game split off and became what we now know as rugby league. And that was choppy waters for rugby union, and he navigated through it, and he got some gates in his honour. But they changed, because things do change. So I think it was, well, there they are back in 1928 or 1929 when they were built, the memorial gates. And they still stand today, but they do change. In 1970, a lion was added. Initially, that was a stone lion. Then in 1991, for the Rugby World Cup, they gave the lion a golden plate. Then, in 1995, I think it was, all the gates got taken down and rebuilt, as they were, round by the West Stand, which is where they currently are. They added a load of other statues, the 4 different rugby player statues. There's the scrum half, the kicker, the winger, and the forward are the 4. Then in 2016, there was another change where these oak gates were added. And that's where the players go through on a match day. Only very, very important people go through these wooden oak gates. And there are other gates that were built by a metal artist, and they're called the Rose and Poppy gates. And that's because on the gates there are the roses, which is the symbol of England rugby, and there are the poppy, which is the symbol of military service people that die in war. And there's a massive link between the military and rugby in the UK. I think that's the case around the world. And as a result, these rose and poppy gates were made, and that was another change. So all these things change over time, and I'm sure these gates will change again, but the gates are still there as they were in 1929. There are some things you change, and there are some things you don't change. And I've got a really good example of what I think the RFU should have done there. So I get you need money, and I understand there are financial pressures, and I understand that naming a stadium it happens. So I'm not against change overall. I like the way Scotland did it. It's BT Murrayfield, British Telecom. They became the title sponsor for the stadium, but they kept the name Murrayfield, BT Murrayfield. Now I've got family in Edinburgh, and I sometimes go up and stay with them, or meet friends up there for a game. I've been up a bunch of times lately, and when I go there, I will say, "Oh, going to the game at Murrayfield. What time should we meet at Murrayfield?" It's BT Murrayfield, but you call it Murrayfield. What England have done, I think, what the RFU have done, I think, is absolute sacrilege. To drop Twickenham from the name entirely is completely out of order. It's beyond the pale. It's not on. And here's why. So that's how I would have done it. I know it's not great. BT Murrayfield sounds a bit corporate and all the rest of it. Allianz Stadium, Twickenham, or the Twickenham Stadium supported by Allianz. I know that all sounds a bit clunky and a bit naff, but it's important because look at what happened in Dublin. Now, the ground was being rebuilt. The old Lansdowne Road was being knocked down and rebuilt, and it was announced it was going to be called the Aviva Stadium. And I remember when this happened, there were so many people who said, "I'm not calling it the Aviva Stadium. I refuse to call it the Aviva Stadium." And, of course, over time, it gets called the Aviva Stadium. What time are we meeting at the Aviva? Where's the game? It's at the Aviva. It's just the way it goes. So the fact that they've dropped Twickenham entirely from the name, I think, I'll go so far. I don't know. You tell me if you think I'm being over the top. I say it's unforgivable. Unforgivable, because as much as I say people are not going to drop the name Twickenham, look what happened in Dublin. The Lansdowne Road is not what that place is known as now. It's known as the Aviva Stadium. And I think that's a real shame. And it will be the most monumental shame if Twickenham Stadium is not known as Twickenham. Or is it? Does it really matter? Tell me what you think. There is a third stadium I'll bring up at this point, which is the one I'm going to be at the end of the month. I'm going to be travelling to Johannesburg and to Cape Town to watch the Rugby Championship matches between South Africa and New Zealand. Cannot wait, by the way. And if you want to follow my travels there, another reason to hit subscribe on the channel. So this is the Emirates Airline Park in Johannesburg, isn't it? Well, it is. And that's how the commentators will refer to it. That's how the match programme will write it down. That's how it will be written on the internet, on the official channels. But how do people talk about this place? It's Ellis Park. When I was in South Africa a few weeks ago, I went to Ellis Park. And I went out on the pitch. It's actually in one of the videos that's on the channel. If you haven't seen that, it's, there's loads of stuff from South Africa that I did that I'd recommend you going to check out. But I went and stood on the spot. I think it's about there. I went and found the spot where Joel Stransky kicked that drop goal in 1995. I went and stood on the spot where Nelson Mandela handed the World Cup trophy to Francois Pienaar, both when they were wearing the Springbok 6 jersey. Iconic moments. And I wonder if there are some places that are so iconic that the name just will not be lost. This, I think, will always be Ellis Park, because there's a kind of a deep emotional thing with that stadium. And my hope is that despite this corporate backer, and I'm grateful for the money in the sport, despite the corporate backer, I'm hopeful that there's enough of an emotional connection that means that Twickenham won't be lost. Certainly, it's Twickenham to me. It always has been. I've had so many great days at Twickenham. I'm so proud of the history of our sport and Twickenham that to me, it will always be Twickenham. I apologise, Allianz, for that, but you'll still be mentioned by the commentators. You'll still be mentioned in the matchday programme, but it won't be Allianz on here. So why are the RFU doing this at all? Well, they're in a financial pickle, which is no secret. They've mismanaged the finances. I mean, yeah, there's some stuff out of their control, COVID and all of that, but there's a lot of stuff that is in their control. Overspending wildly on one of the stand redevelopments. Just the mismanagement in general it's been pretty shocking. Look at the way that 4 professional clubs have gone bust on their watch. There's the absolute mess they've made of the Championship and the funding of that. Grassroots rugby, for all the talk about, participation numbers going up, just my experience of it is that there are some serious issues because of the kind of messages that are being put out by the custodians of the sport. I use that word for I apologise to the chap, George Rowland Hill. I use that word. He was a custodian in the sport. The RFU are custodians, and I don't think they've been doing the things that really are the best for the sport. The way that the messages they're sending out. There's Anyway, I could do a whole other video on that. It's not been great. So I get that they're in a financial hole and they need cash. So they've taken the money. But one interesting thing bubbling away in the background here, which I don't know the ins and outs of this, so I'm kind of speculating at this point. But as I understand it, and I'll wait for sort of official confirmation on this. So take this with a pinch of salt. But I believe I'm right in saying that British Airways are soon not going to be England's official airline partner. That's certainly what I've heard. But it might not be the case, but I believe that's the case. And I wonder, this is me speculating at this point, there's speculation that Qatar Airways were going to be the new RFU, England Rugby airline partner. Just as they are the partner for South Africa, they're the partner for the British and Irish Lions tour next year. And I wonder if torpedoing the Qatar Nations Championship finals weekend for its £800 million deal might have affected the finances at the RFU, which might be why they've had to do something a little bit more radical to get a bit more cash in. I don't know the ins and outs of that. It's kind of what's bubbling around in the background. I'll wait for official confirmation, but who knows? That may be one of the moving parts here. But I think what I can say is that I'm disappointed, and I'm kind of gonna resist it. Instinctively, I think I would resist it. I quite often resist law changes when they come in. I don't like things changing too much. Certainly, though, on a deep emotional level, I think there's something very special and priceless about Twickenham Stadium. So, am I right to be bothered? Does it actually really matter? I guess, do you know what? Here's another thing I'll throw in when we're talking about the actual cash. If the RFU were really good at spending money, and I thought that the however much money Allianz are going to be paying for the naming rights, if I thought that money was going to be spent really wisely to grow the grassroots game, to have a great professional structure below the Premiership, I might look more favourably on it. But I've got no confidence that is going to be the case. So it just adds to it. Anyway, I've talked enough. Tell me what you think. I'll see you on the next video.